Jayson, what's going on, man? Welcome to the Dad Edge podcast.
Larry, honored to be here, man. Thank you.
Hey, I appreciate you had to rush to get to this interview because camping in the wilderness, right?
Yeah, dude, I was camping 2 nights in the Colorado wilderness with my family, and it was like, oh shit, I got a noon interview with this guy, Larry. I got to Zoom home, so we woke up early, which was cool because we saw a moose. We saw this massive moose in this meadow. We were driving out of our campsite, so it was just a beautiful morning, and glad I did that so I could be here with you.
Man, I feel honored. Like, I don't know if I would be like, yeah, it's pretty beautiful here. What does next Monday look like for you?
I do that sometimes, but man, it's kind of go
Yeah.
time right now, and again, I love talking to fellow dads and husbands and stuff. So
Yeah, man. Me too. Me too. And I know you and I powwowed a little bit before we got started today. I actually normally what I do on this show is I like to get started with everybody's childhood because it's
yeah.
always fascinating to me to hear, you know, what your blueprint was growing up, the good, the
hmm
bad, the not, the all everything in between. But today what I really like to start on is your new book coming out. I just want you to share the title and maybe the premise around the book, and then I want to head back to your childhood.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so my new book's called Getting to Zero: How to Work Through Conflict in Your High Stakes Relationships. And it's the premise is really that if it's true we want successful long-term relationships, that could be family or that could be a business partnership or a team of some kind, then we've better get good at conflict. And this is a roadmap and a guidebook on how to do that.
So when you say getting to zero, what does getting to zero truly mean?
Yeah, so zero is our baseline where we feel good and connected. There's no shit in the way, no conflict. We've worked through it. We're on the other side, or we haven't experienced conflict in a few weeks, and we're as a partnership or whatever, we're in a good place. Zero is our baseline, and it goes up to 1 through 10. 10 being we're in a really bad place. That's I'm really triggered and activated. Maybe I'm enraged. Maybe I'm totally dissociated and shut down. So when we get into a snag with another person, we go from zero to whatever our number is. Like maybe it's a 4. It's a mild conflict with someone, or maybe someone doesn't text us back, and that feels conflictual to us, and we're like a 3, and that just feels bad. So we talk about it and we try to work through it so we can get back to our good place again. So our zero is our good place baseline.
So do you have a passion for conflict resolution?
I do, but I don't like conflict. Let's be clear.
Okay.
It's very uncomfortable for me, conflict. I don't like how I feel. I don't like being at odds with my wife, for example, or really anyone in my life. And that motivates me, that bad feeling motivates me to try to resolve it and get to the other side and get back to that good place. But yeah, it seems like for years I have a fascination with why people can't work out their differences, and continuing to see just disaster after disaster in my life. So it's like I want to come up with something that can really help the layperson here, because we're not taught this in school or college, and I think it's such a vital life skill.
We're not. What's funny is that before you and I jumped on today, I was on a coaching call with one of my clients. He actually owns a barber shop.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were going through some things in his marriage and things that he wants to hone in on, things that are missing and all that. And we got to talking about communication and connection, which is, right. He's kind of right in line with conflict, right? Because he's like, gosh, I feel like we're always fighting all the time. I was like, well, do you know what good communication really looks like? And he's like, yeah, I just want to be more connected. I was like, well, what does that mean? Well, I want us to talk deeper about things. Well, what's happening when that's happening? He's like, well, we feel ultimately connected and we're talking about things that we wouldn't normally talk about. And you could tell like this was the first time he was articulating this stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then finally he kind of threw up his hands. He's like, you know what, man, I don't know what it looks like. I have no idea. And I was like, good. I figured you'd say that. I was like, because, I don't know the first thing about cutting somebody's hair. I was like, I literally had to take my boys to the barbershop last night because I tried to cut their hair on my own and I screwed it up so bad that my wife was like, you got to go fix that before they go back to school. And so I took them to someone who knew what the heck they were doing. I was like, so, me trying to cut somebody's hair, I'm clueless on what that looks like or how to do it unless I'm going to buzz their entire head of hair off.
Yeah. Right.
And that's when you saw it click for him. He's like, oh, so this is a skill. Like I always thought, he even told me, he was like, man, that's really reassuring to know, because I always thought, like, if I didn't know how to do this naturally, like I just wasn't, I was, maybe we weren't meant to be. Right.
Hmm.
And that's like our perception, like, oh, if it doesn't come
Totally.
naturally, maybe we weren't meant to be, which is crazy. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really good example. I mean, so many of us sort of think we know how, especially us guys, because it feels really bad to not know. Like we're
Yeah.
trained to like be in charge and know, and that's a good thing. And somehow that's our security and our competency, and our value is measured on how much we know. Right. And when
Yeah.
we don't know what the hell we're doing in our marriage, it's very confronting, and it's hard
Yeah.
to look another man in the eyes and say, I feel really lost in the weeds here.
Yep. Totally. I totally get it. I want to go back to your childhood. I'm
Yeah.
always so curious, man. And I've interviewed, I think, almost 800 shows to date. So I've
Damn.
heard all kinds of fascinating childhood stories, but I would just love to know, what was the relationship like with your own parents, siblings? What was the environment of your house like?
We had kind of a beaver cleaver family. So on the outside, it looked kind of hunky dory.
Hmm.
Um, and I even had friends say, man, you have such a great family, which is always confusing to me because I felt so lost in my family and so alone. And so I'd be like, really? Wow. Okay. But my parents are still married, and they're 58 years, I think, going on. Um,
58 years of marriage?
yeah, 58 years.
Wow.
Um, totally. It's amazing how they've done it. And I wouldn't want their marriage, but it's pretty damn cool that they're, have found a way that works for them. And mostly it's compartmentalize their conflicts. So you can do that and have a long-term relationship, but I don't recommend that. And my brother, I'm the youngest of three. My older brother's 5 years older. He's in Idaho, and my sister's in Utah, and she's 2 years older than me. They're all married, have kids. I was sort of the last one to have a family, but growing up, I was that sensitive, emotional kid, and I sort of got the message from my dad and my environment, the boys on the playground, that wasn't cool. So I did my best to bury my sensitivity, my empathy, my emotions, and you can't get rid of a part of yourself, right? But I sure tried, and I put on a tough facade and tried to act tough, and I got good at sports because that's where you can get a lot of recognition as a boy with other boys. And I played sports, and I was decent, but I wasn't a winner, mostly because I was doing it for my dad's love and approval and attention. Um, yeah, and the house generally was safe, but I had a very weird relationship. My dad worked all the time, 7 to 7, like every day for as long as I can remember, to provide for us, which I'm super grateful for. And he was a very emotionally kind of unavailable dad, if you could say that. But he was busted his ass to be there for me on kind of nights and weekends, and he would always show up for me and taught me how to catch and throw the ball. And yeah, he was like there for me in that way, in his values, in the way that he could be there for me. And then my mom was a former school teacher and stay-at-home mom, and so she was there a lot, but she had her own kind of unresolved stuff that it seemed to me, play out with me. And I had this real weird relationship where I felt really close to her, and then she would go silent and kind of go dark, and then I would feel very anxious and scared as a little kid. Yeah, so that kind of template that got laid down, where I repressed my emotions and my sensitivity and had this kind of conflictual relationship with my mom, and then my dad, just, we do sports and that's all we do, led me to relationships in my 20s that were very challenging, because I was, at that point now, was a very guarded guy. I was very emotionally unavailable, and I would keep women at an arm's length. I always wanted to be in a relationship, but I didn't know how to do them. And so I would do this weird push pull. I want to be close with you, but don't come too close, kind of push pull thing, at the same time. So that was very difficult for me until I started working on myself and realizing all of my patterns and started to have some more choice around it. But that's kind of just a big picture of my childhood.
And how did you get into the space that you're working in now? I mean, did you do something professionally before this?
Yeah. So at age 29, I was breaking up with another good woman, and I kept blaming women for all my relationship problems, and I was
Did you
blaming
say
this.
breaking up with another good woman?
Yes.
Wow. I mean, I've never heard that before. So this
Yeah.
kind of goes back to, hey, don't get close to me, but not too close. So
Yep.
was it actually a pattern that you would actually find, like, hey, this woman's fantastic, but I don't know, I'm going to end it at some point. What do you think that pattern was?
Yeah, exactly. They were awesome women for the most part. I always judged them as not being enough for me. There was always something wrong with them that in my mind, that I would sort of label as they're not enough. And when she started 2 months into the relationship, when a woman started needing something or wanting to have a talk, or we'd get into a little snag, it felt really bad. And so I would go climbing and drinking and hanging out with my guy friends, and it felt better. So I was like, I concluded it must be her, right? Because you're making me feel this way and I don't like feeling this way. So I'll just fire you and move on to the next relationship. So I kept repeating that, thinking that you're not supposed to feel bad in a long-term relationship, that if you do feel bad, it's probably the other person's fault, or it's because you're not with the right person. That's what
wasn't meant to be.
Wasn't meant to be. Hey man, not meant to be. It's a little chunky, a little crunchy here, not good enough. So I'm doing that pattern again, and I realized I was the one common denominator in all these relationship failures. And when I saw that at age 29, I was like, shit, I can do something about that. That's actually inside my control. Mm-hmm. And then I immediately went to graduate school a few months later to study myself and study psychology. Got a master's degree in psychology, became a therapist. And I just hyper focused on relationships. I eventually had a private practice with just couples, and that's all I worked with for years, was trying to help people in their relationships. And then I just wanted to reach more people and scale my business. And I was starting to learn a ton and teach more and run groups and men's groups and mixed gender groups. And then I became a coach and took my business online.
Interesting. Going back to everything that you've seen in couples counseling, I mean, I would imagine the amount of hours that you have spent listening to couples, right? There's got to be some really common themes when people sit across from you. You can almost, it's almost like seeing the Matrix, right? You could probably say it before they do. What are some of the most common themes, conflicts that you see?
Yeah, I mean, I've identified 5 in the book that I talk about. Surface fights, resentment fights, projection fights, value difference fights, and security fights. And the most common dynamic that couples get into.
Do you mind repeating those one more time?
Sure. Surface fights, resentment fights, projection fights, value difference fights, and security fights.
Fascinating. I've never heard that before. I'd love to hear about these.
Cool. I can unpack those. And basically what a lot of these are about initially, and this is what we do when we're scared and we get triggered and we get upset, is we just point the finger at the other person. And we create a narrative that says, if you would just change, this conflict would be better and we would be in a much better place and we wouldn't be dealing with this.
Right.
But people get that's like the most common normal position in a fight between two people, particularly a couple. We just blame. And then it becomes very hard to take responsibility for our part because we don't think we have a part. We think it's just the other person.
Yeah.
And then people get very stuck there.
Can you briefly go over just the 5 and what they mean?
Yeah. So surface fights is just what we all experience in a marriage, even in our families, with kids, with our parents, whoever, where we're fighting about little things like someone being late, or where you left the keys, or who has my phone, or the dishes aren't, done and they're in the sink. And it seems very innocuous, all these little trivial things that we fight about and bicker about in homes. But if there's charge that doesn't match the crime, kind of if I'm like really upset about the dishes or the keys, all that means is there's a tributary going deeper to one of these other 4 fights. And I can unpack those. So people get lost thinking it's just a surface fight, and they don't actually see that there's a deeper resentment here, that actually there was this one thing that happened 10 years ago and you never addressed it, and I'm still mad about it. I'm still hurt about it. I'm still mad. And anytime that little thing happens, it brings up my resentment, right? And a resentment is when I try to get you to live by my values, or you try to get me to live by your values. We're going to resent each other and create expectations that are hard for another person to meet, and those turn into resentments over time. Value differences is like, I want this kids to go to public school. No, you want them to go to private school. That can be a very big deal in a marriage when we can't align around our values and how we see the world. Or vaccines and no vaccines is a big one, obviously, but usually couples are pretty aligned there.
Do finances fit in that same one?
Finances fit in that one. Yep. How you do? You have a lot of debt and you value spending money, and I have no debt and I value saving money. We're going to fight about money, right?
Does sex also go in that category?
Yep. Sex can be a security fight and a value difference fight.
Okay.
Sex meaning like value differences is I value having sex and touching and being intimate, and that's one of the ways I feel connected to you. And the other person's like, I don't feel safe, and no, I'm not into it, or I have a low sex drive, or ever since the kids kind of thing. And couples can start to drift there. And security fights are complicated because there's our security on some level as an animal, as a social mammal, is at stake, which means we feel unsafe on some level in the relationship, one of us or both of us. And usually that's because one person has one foot in and one foot out of the relationship. The other person's nervous system has a hard time relaxing, knowing that you could leave any moment because you got one foot in, one foot out. So this is often in a person with commitment issues, pre-marriage. It can happen after you're married. Certainly there's people that have one foot in, one foot out, even after marriage. So that's a security fight. And then projection fight is like the common one you hear in counseling, where you're the imago technique, the Hendrixes, of like you project your unresolved childhood issues onto the other person, or you project your parents onto the other person. And it's you find yourself in a relationship as an adult and you're like, oh, this kind of feels strangely familiar, like my family, like I'm in a relationship with my mom, like what the hell's going on here? Those can be a little more sophisticated on the psychological front, but the simplistic term is just like, yeah, you probably feel like you're with your dad or mom sometimes, or a sibling, and it's then you play out kind of what didn't get resolved as a kid. You play it out with an adult partner.
Wow. I have never heard those arguments summed up like that, but that makes so much sense. Are there, out of those five, is there one or two that are more common than the others?
Not really. I think we all experience, like resentments is a big one that people get stuck on. This is the one where people go to counseling or they try to read a book to get through their resentment. And it's this feeling of we never got through the conflict from 6 months ago or 6 years ago. And because we never completed it, we never got to zero, we never got back to a good place, it's still here in our space, right? And it's like a moldy, it's like mold, and it just starts to kind of contaminate our connection, and it just impacts the way we actually open to each other, and it starts to turn into sarcasm and bickering and little jabs of like you're with your friends for a beer and you throw your partner under the bus with your friends, right? That's a sign that you have a resentment. Or women who are hanging out with each other and then they make some pejorative comment about their husband being like another child that they feel like they have to raise. That's usually there's a resentment going on there. I think that's in all relationships, resentments happen. And they're pretty easy to crack if you understand the concept of a resentment and how to work through it. But people don't know how, and then they just start making jabs, and that somehow feels good. It's like off-gassing. It's like it feels better when I just like throw my partner under the bus, but it's like, no, you can actually feel differently.
Interesting. So talk to us about what you just said, which there's actually a way that you can get through resentment. Like, and I'm sure, and I say this all the time to my coaching clients and people that when you're emotionally a part of that particular situation, right? So if you're in a marriage and there's resentment involved and you're emotionally tied to that situation, it's very, very hard to think step by step and even logically, how do we get through this resentment? Because all we're going on is like supercharged feelings. Am I right there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of all we're going on. But if there's a repeating complaint, usually it's a repeating complaint. So see if you can identify the repeating complaint, which is you never, you always language.
Okay.
Is usually a sign that there's a resentment. And I have an expectation then. So the next place I look, there's two steps here. So I can say, I resent that you never, and then fill in the blank, right? Or you always, and fill in the blank. You never text me back when I text you, and we're kind of in a snag, and it feels like you go dark on me. And so I resent you for that. Just change the word resentment now to expectation. I have an expectation that you never go dark on me. You always return my text. And now the person can see, oh, I've had an expectation there. You continue to fall down and not meet the expectation, right? And now at least I start to own what I have control over, which is my expectation. Maybe I'm asking you too much. Maybe what I'm asking of you and expecting of you isn't something you can accomplish or do in our marriage or our life, clearly, or you would be doing it.
Right.
And then the subtler layer here is someone has to see is I'm asking you to live like me. So a classic one is you're late and I'm on time. So if I say, well, I get irritated by people that are late. So I can say, I expect you to be on time like me. That's all I'm saying is I expect you to do life like me. You shouldn't be late. You shouldn't be you. Being on time is better. You should be like me. That's me just saying you need to live according to my values. And when we do that, we're starting to create a resentment, the birth ground of resentments. Because often people can't live up to another person's expectations and win and succeed. Usually because they're doing it for the other person, right? They're not doing it for themselves. And when I can't do something for myself, I don't intrinsically see like being on time is good for me. I'm not going to do it and then I'm going to feel obligated to change because of you, because just to get you off my back. Well, I'm going to resent you because you keep asking me to change.
Yeah. Is that the point where we need to just accept the other person for who they are and just be like, well, it's just who they are. And I can decide to stay with them, love them, be with them, or I can decide to go elsewhere because that's on them. And that's the way they're living their life. And I'm the one that needs to make that decision, not necessarily someone change for me.
Yeah. I mean, you're bringing up a good point, which is at a certain point we're going to come to a crossroads where we can make a decision like that. But the first step is, am I willing to accept this person as they are? Because that's loving someone. Is I love you as you are is felt by the other person. The other person doesn't feel judged and criticized. They don't feel like they need to be a different person to get your approval or love. That feels really good. That feels really safe. I don't have to guard and defend myself and protect myself. But that's hard to do in a long-term marriage, to just accept someone as they are, right? Usually, if we're normal, we're like, hey, can you tweak this? Hey, can you change that about yourself? Because it would feel a whole lot better over here. Right. So I have introduced people to the concept of reasonable requests. You can make a reasonable request for behavior change, but don't ask them to change who they are. So it's personhood versus behavior. We get to ask for behavior change if it's reasonable. Don't ask for someone to change who they are, or it's gonna turn ugly, I think.
Can you give us an example of that?
Yeah. Let's see. Let's come back to debt. Okay. Someone's has a lot of debt. You married a person with debt, and you agreed, it's cool, I'll take on your debt. I'm successful at my job over here, and we'll do that together. And no prenups or anything. It's just like, oh, let's do this. Well, over time, I'm going to probably resent you, right? Because you're not getting your shit together with your finances. Right. And I can ask. It feels reasonable to say, hey, would you be willing to learn about money with me and how we can grow wealth in our family? Would you be willing to do that? Because I think it will help us both feel more fulfilled. And when you just max out your credit cards over there and I'm part of your family, it really impacts me. It's hard to watch. It's frustrating. I feel totally like blown off here. I don't feel like you care about me and my value and what I'm bringing. So we can have conversations and even arguments about this, right? So it feels reasonable to ask that, but that's behavior, right? I would like you to change your behavior around how you relate to finances. But how you're fundamentally wired, let's say you came from a family with a lot of debt. It's like in your lineage. And there's just massive challenging complications around money. Asking you to change who you are here is going to be pretty steep ask. I don't know if that was a great example, but it's like some people are wired a certain way around money, and it's going to take them years to change that, right? Years, because it's kind of who they are.
Yeah.
They grew up with scarcity. Like my dad did well in his life, but he has a deep scarcity in him from his dad and from their lineage, right? I don't know that he's ever going to change that, but he can certainly change his behavior around money.
Interesting. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Let me ask you this. This is a situation that emerged in me as you were speaking. So we run a large mastermind group for men. It's called Dad Edge Alliance. And we have over 650 men who are part of that group. And I see posts from quite a few men here and there, but there's one man that I'm thinking of right now that, and I think it's a huge theme that we see in marriages. And to be honest, like I don't I don't have the answer to this one.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know like the deep psychological reason why people do what they do. And I'll give you the example. So like the person that I'm thinking of, he's like, man, he's like, every morning when I get up, I'm waiting to hear about the first thing that I did wrong or what I didn't do right
Yeah.
or what I missed. And he's like, and it happens all day long. And then my wife will come back to me and just love on me. And then I did something wrong and she'll yell at me. And then I didn't fulfill this need and I didn't do this and I missed that. And, you know, hearing this one gentleman's story in particular, it just sounds like a home that you're walking on eggshells where you feel like, and in his words, I feel like I can do nothing right. And it is so defeating and I don't know how to fix it.
Yeah.
So for men out there who are dealing with that, where they're just like, my God, like, I just don't feel like I do anything right. And worst part of all, I have no idea how to fix that. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's my take there?
Yeah.
What I say? Yeah. I mean, man, that's a tough one. I just want to validate that man's feelings, that would feel really hurtful, upsetting. Like it feels like you don't matter. What you're doing is not good enough. Right. And a lot of guys like that my first question is, have you ever felt this way prior to meeting your wife? Right. And there might be a correlation with your mom or your dad or caregiver. There might be a connection there. And if so, that tells us something about your orientation, that you have a narrative in yourself that's like, I can't do anything right. And then you create situations and relationships in your life that confirm the narrative. So there is something you can do on your side. And the first thing is, why do I allow myself to be treated like this? You know, I mean, it's a good question. Like, why do I allow myself to be treated like this? And do I believe that I am doing a good enough or good job in the household, as a husband or as a dad or whatever? Do I believe that? And if you believe that and someone's criticizing you, the criticism doesn't have a place to stick. So if you don't believe you're doing enough or good enough or whatever, the next question is, according to who? According to her? Like what standards are we talking about here? Like how high is this bar that you've somehow bought into, that you also need to meet some unrealistic expectation of how you should be? And then I would do a lot of reflection on it. I would ask my men's group, or I would get other people, hey, am I doing an adequate job here? Here's all the things I'm doing in my family. Is that an adequate job? And get some reflections from some people in your life that actually know you. And then you can start bringing it to your partner, your actual wife here, and say, look, I don't like how I'm being treated. It's been going on for years. It's a vulnerability of mine that I have allowed it this long. And it's starting to feel really bad. And it's starting to have me, and just talk about your feelings. I feel judged. I feel criticized. I feel like I'm never enough. Those are the feelings. And that's my work to do. I gotta like keep working on that so that I can feel like enough in my own eyes. Right. And honey, it sucks to be in this environment. It feels unsafe. I feel unseen. I feel unsupported. And then, later in that night, you come around and you support me, and that's nice, but it's not consistent. It's like I'm up here and we're cool, or I'm down here and like I'm in the pit and like I can't do anything right for you. And it's like, that's our cycle. And then you can say, dude, I want out of this. No, thank you. I want out of this dynamic, and I'm going to do my part to learn how to value myself more, to appreciate myself more, and bust my ass stronger according to me and what I think is successful here at the home. And I would like you to, get off my back, basically, because it's not promoting that kind of criticism. Isn't promoting a secure partnership. I delineate insecure partnership, secure partnership. A secure partnership is where we both feel safe and seen. But I do think this man has a lot of work to do on self-value. Right? Valuing himself. Because look, if I feel insecure, dude, about something in my life, and I keep getting criticized there, that's life telling me to work on feeling more secure with this issue. That's a more empowering way to look at it than, hey, stop criticizing me. I'm like, ooh, opportunity for growth here. How can I get stronger in the face of criticism so that criticism doesn't impact me so deeply That's my own work to do, right?
Yeah. I love how the example that you shared, the person owns their feelings. And no part of
Yeah.
that where you're like, when you do this, it makes me feel like this.
Yeah.
You own the feeling. And I think is that where a lot of people get tripped up and
Yeah.
where they just start
Yes.
completely banging on each other's head? Like,
I yeah. I
yeah, go
feel
ahead.
like you. Larry, I feel like you always. Larry, it's like that's not an I feel statement. That's about Larry. It's not about me.
Yeah.
I
Our,
feel
our,
sad. I feel scared. I feel helpless. That's a feeling about yourself.
so feelings are one word, right?
I like to keep them to one word.
Yeah. And then
Yep.
thoughts are more sentences, right? So like, for
Yeah.
instance, if someone says, I feel like we just don't talk like we used to, you're like, well, that's not really a feeling, that's a thought. Like, my thoughts tell me, as I reflect upon this, that we don't talk as much as we used to. And when I think that thought, I feel sad
Yeah.
because I
I
want to
love
talk
that.
to you more. Yeah.
Exactly. Boom. And another way to do that is the story I have about us is that we don't talk very much.
Hmm.
And when I think about that story, I feel really sad and alone.
Yeah. Do you think it's always really powerful to also end something like that with what I want? So like, um, the story I'm telling myself is we don't talk as much as we used to, and you know, and we don't connect as much as we used to. And when I think about that, I feel sad because what I truly want is to feel ultimately connected to you, and I want to have these deep conversations that we used to have.
I like that. Yeah, I think that's great. I would add one thing up front if we're going to go down this road, which I really like, is empathy for the other person. And so that would look like, hey, I know you're really busy and you've been holding it down with the kids or your job or whatever. And I see you really bust your ass over there. And it's inspiring to see how you live your life like that. And I miss you. I miss us. So it's like I'm seeing you and I'm appreciating even all that you're going through, and that might be part of the reason that you can't show up for me and connect more deeply with me or in the way we used to or whatever. I think a lot of us, we want to feel seen and acknowledged in the reason almost, right? It's like, so I'm trying to beat them to it and say what I might think the reason is they might come back to me and say, well, I've been really full. I'm really busy. I'm overwhelmed or I'm really stressed. So I want to see them in that first so that then when they're like, thank you. Now I have a little more room to hear you out.
Yes. Yes, man, I love that. Have you ever heard of a skill set called walking the cube?
No.
So it's exactly what we just did,
Mm.
except for you tied in empathy with it. So it's making an observation. Hey, this is what I see, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Here are my thoughts around it. When I have those thoughts, here's how I feel. And what I truly want is this. It's a 4 quadrant, observations, thoughts, feelings, and then wants. But
Nice.
I love how I would call it an empathetic observation to
Mm-hmm.
start off with, because it's very disarming. And
Right.
it also feels really good because you're right, because I know something is coming, on the other side when they're talking like that. But at the same time, I feel it makes me very curious and intrigued and
Mm-hmm.
disarmed when someone makes an empathetic observation versus like, why don't we talk anymore? You're always so busy, and
Totally.
then you're just like,
I'm on the defensive,
yeah, now I
Like,
want to argue.
yeah, I mean, my wife's just taken me to school here. I still am very dense here sometimes around empathy, but she's helped me become a more empathic human being over time because it's not as strong. Like I can empathize with other people or clients, for example, or students, whatever. But I am under stress with her. That's the hardest place for me to empathize, right? It's like, oh fuck, I'm just so jammed up here. But she's just takes a stand for that. Like, look, that's something I need over here, and it's really helped me become more empathic in moments that matter, with her. And I still have a lot to learn.
Man, that is so cool. I'm surprised though, because like you talked about it during your childhood, you were sensitive and empathetic. And do you think
Yeah.
you're not as empathetic now because you more or less had to control, you felt that growing up you had to control that part of you, maybe diving into sports and doing other things that maybe sort of put that on the sidelines a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good observation. I think so. And I will say, I don't have any problem seeing a homeless person on the street or someone suffering and empathizing. Like, I feel very like actually vulnerable sometimes there. I feel like I'm almost too I need more shields up, right? From some of the shit going on in the world. Sometimes I feel that because I am very empathic, but it seems to me that the hardest place though is in this marriage, right? Like you'll notice that probably a lot of your guys are like very good listeners at work or somewhere else, but like they're terrible listeners when it comes to their intimate partnership, under stress, right? In the key moments when it matters, they just go right into fixing or problem solving, which isn't really listening.
Why do we do that? I'm curious.
Well, I know why I don't really struggle and why I go to fix it, problem solve mode, because I feel when I see someone else in pain, and this is back to the empathy stuff, I don't like how that feels. And if I caused it, I also don't like how that feels. And I want that feeling in me to go away as soon as possible. So if I fix it, I can feel better faster, right? Sooner.
Interesting. Is that why maybe in work relationships, we can actually be better listeners versus in our personal relationships because they're more emotionally charging?
Yeah. And again, the stakes are a little lower. That's why my book is about high stakes relationships, because it's the hardest. Conflict is the hardest in a long-term business partnership, on a long-term team or band, or in a long-term marriage or families. It's pretty hard because if things don't go well, it could be pretty ugly, right?
Yeah.
Kids,
For sure.
mortgage, finances, divorce, like, ooh.
Yeah, no doubt. I would actually love to switch gears and talk
Yeah.
about some of these skill sets as it relates to fatherhood.
Yeah, bring it.
So, you have, so you said, yeah, I know you have two. One's a teenager, right?
12 and 10, two
12 and
kids, boy
10.
and a girl. Yeah.
Okay, 12 and 10. Okay, so you got the preteen.
I'm
But
ramping up here.
yes,
On the
you are.
on-ramp to adolescence.
Yes, you are. But as it relates to getting to zero with being a father,
Mhm.
I'm trying to actually think about that, and it's like how I'm sure there's super appropriate ways to have conflict resolution with your kids, but how do you go about using these skill sets with kids?
Yeah, my wife and I are actually very diligent about this. So we like our home to the baseline to be zero in our house, right? And my son and daughter fight daily. Um, and it's not like brawls, right? We're not talking about that. Just bickering and like, hey, you did that. It's not fair. Like, I didn't get the same slice of cake that you did. Like, you paid attention to him first. And, like, there's always something, right? I mean, you would know, four kids. I mean, it's like there's always some relationship challenge going on somewhere, probably, right?
Always, always.
Yeah, and it's okay. This is part of our culture. So part of my wife and I made a very clear decision early on. Like when my son was actually biting and hitting our daughter when she was first born, because he was pissed, right? He had mom and dad all to himself, and then along comes his daughter. Now he's like, "What? I'm not the only person in town here. I'm not the most important person." So we actually did a series of parenting classes around how do we talk to a kid, because here I am, Mr. Cool therapy guy, trying to talk like an adult to a 2-year-old, right? Or a 3-year-old. It doesn't work. My skills are rendered like almost useless, right? So she taught me how do we do this with a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old. And we started getting better and better at it. And again, it's not eliminating the conflicts. It's how do we help our son and daughter work out their differences so that we can all be back to a good place in our home. So it's very much one of the first moves kids do is you did it, kind of, it's not me, it's not my fault, it's you did it kind of thing, blame. Very understandable because human nature. But we teach our kids taking responsibility is the fastest way to get out of this thing. What's your part? Just say your part, right? Say it out loud. My part is that I was kind of mean. And then we teach basic empathy. And what do you imagine that felt like over there, right? And then we teach validation, like that it makes sense that your sister is crying now because you were a jerk, dude. What you just did was lame. And does it make sense that she's crying? And for him to connect the dots and go, yeah, that makes sense. So my son is actually pretty amazing at this when they get into a conflict now, in terms of his ability to listen and then see her in her pain. I see you're sad. It makes sense you're sad. I see that I'm part of the reason you're sad, right? Because I did that thing again that I always do to you.
So it was take responsibility, and then
Yep.
what were the other two?
Yeah, and they don't have to be in this order.
Okay.
Just to be clear, it's basic skills that don't necessarily have to come in this order, but it's take responsibility, validate their feelings. And my 3 favorite words for validation are that makes sense. And this is good for the dads here for their partners, is just to say, that makes sense, honey, that you're upset, right? Makes total sense. Because kids want to be known in their experience. And when they're known in their experience and it makes sense to you, it makes sense to them. And then they feel like they can trust their experience, they can trust themselves and their feelings. Like, I don't know about you, but given your history that you shared with me briefly, it's like I grew up with a dad who had no room for my feelings. So I learned to not trust feelings and not trust myself. So we give kids an amazing gift when we tell them their feelings make sense to us. They can trust those feelings because those feelings can help them in life, Yeah, so I think our kids are decent at it, and we're like the referee or the facilitator a lot of the time still. But it matters. It's such a high value to us that we all get back to a good place. We're willing to drop the phone or drop what we're doing, or as soon as possible, an hour later or whenever, get back to the unresolved issue. And so we clear it. We're cool, right? Everybody cool? We good? All right, let's move on.
You know what I really love about that? You're not only teaching conflict resolution, but you're teaching emotional intelligence, right?
Yeah.
Because how many grown adults do you see in your office, right? That you're just like, well, how's that make you feel? I don't know. I'm just pissed.
Yeah.
And anger, if I understand it correctly, is a secondary emotion, right? It's
Yeah,
not,
it can be.
yeah. And, but a lot of adults can't necessarily articulate what it is that they feel and why they feel it.
Totally.
And we have this tremendous opportunity, right, as fathers, and I know it's not the most comfortable thing in the world to be like, hey, how do I guide my kids to their feelings?
Yeah.
Because like the manly thing to do is just not feel your feelings, right?
Yeah, right.
So, but I have a 7-year-old, and I started doing this with my 2 older ones. And what we do is it's like roses and thorns. We'll talk about that. Like
Yeah.
what was the best part of your
Love
day?
that.
What was the most challenging? And we always, or something that excites you about something's going to happen the next day. But we always have some sort of conversation, and we always try to intertwine the one word feeling that's associated with that experience. So my 7-year-old, and both my 2 older boys, especially my oldest, who's 15, he's very good at articulating exactly how he feels and why he feels it. So I'm like, you sound like you're angry. No, I'm not angry. I'm actually really sad. I'm like, wow, like that, and he'll even correct you, if it's not a good feeling.
It's cool.
My 7-year-old, when I put him in bed at night, he's always like, Dad, let's have the feelings talk. Right. Which, as a father and a masculine guy, you're like, oh, that sounds kind of weird. But what I love about that is that we get to associate his daily experiences with what he felt in that moment, so he can identify how he feels, so he can get better and better and better at it.
Yeah.
Because the last thing I want is for my kids to be raised in an environment like I was, where you're like, I don't know what I feel, I just don't like it. All right.
Get me away from it. Yep.
Right. And here's the behaviors I'm going to do to cope with these feelings. Right.
Totally.
So
that's awesome.
I've never heard these 3 different things, taking responsibility and how does that feel? And then the validation behind that. That's gold, man. I love that.
Cool. Yeah. And again, this is good for adult partnerships too. Like,
yeah.
Because men tend to, when their partner says, I feel sad, we want to fix it. We want to make it better. We want to make it go away. And then if my wife, for example, says, well, this is what I saw happen, and then I feel sad, I could easily go, that's not what happened. Which is, again, a waste of time.
Right.
But we want to take the view that everybody's experience is 100% valid. How they see the world is 100% valid. It has nothing to do with right and wrong.
Right.
And so if I can say that makes sense, those 3 words, honey, she feels like she can bring her pain to me and it's okay. And I'm not going to fix it. Sometimes my wife, she just wants to be heard and seen in her pain. She doesn't need me to do anything but be present and be there with her. And actually, the thing I can do is empathize and validate. Like, oh, wow, that sounds like a lot. You're going through a lot. Whoa. Whew. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for letting me know where you're at. Got it. That's huge, right? I don't need to do anything.
Does your wife ever like, I know what you're doing? You're using those psychological Jedi mind tricks on
Here's
me.
the thing. When I do that shit, man, she's all over it. She can't stand it when I try to coach her in any way.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
She doesn't like that at all. So it has to be, this is why I'm like, she's a good teacher, mentor for me, because my empathy has to be genuine. It can't be the technique that Jayson taught himself and teaches other people. It's no, it really makes sense to me, honey. Like, I'm not doing a technique on you. And most of the time it goes well, but there is those times when I'm just trying to move us the fuck on. Like, I want to get out of here, and I'm doing the technique, and she's just like, middle finger.
Right. Right. I know you're not listening to me.
Yeah. You don't really care.
Give us an example of what that really looks like. So, because I think the miss is guys listening to the show, right, and who don't necessarily know some of the skill sets that you and I know, and they're like, okay, we've talked about empathy. I've been told a million times not to fix her problems. So like, and if I go to YouTube and I watch, it's not about the nail one more time, I'm gonna like shoot myself in the foot at this point.
Right.
But like,
Right.
so your wife like, let me give you an example, because I would actually really love to hear like how these conversations unfold. So like, let's just say, this sounds so weird as I'm saying, let's just say you and I are married. All right.
Yeah, let's do it. Right. This will actually be the best. This is the best. So please. Yeah.
Because this is real world. Okay. So I'm the wife, and you come home, you notice that I'm quiet, and then you just ask me like, hey, are you all right?
Hey, honey, are you okay? Is it okay if I call you honey?
Right. That's good. No, I had a horrible day today.
Okay. I'm available if you want to say more about what happened.
Yeah, totally. So you know what? So Mason came home today. He immediately got on his phone. That drives me crazy. He didn't ask if he could do any chores or help me around the house. Not only that, but Ethan came home. He's really upset because he had some drama at school, and then he got a D on the test that he was studying for. Colton I just got a letter today, an email today, that he's quarantined for the next 6 days because it had a close contact. Like, I literally never feel like I get a break. Like, I just wanted to get some things done, and now I have to homeschool with him for the next 5 days. I feel like I'm going to pull my hair out.
Yeah. Holy cow. That makes total sense. Of course you're feeling like you want to pull your hair out. That is so much to navigate. I mean, all 3 kids going through a ton at the same time, and then you have to like deal with it. That is a lot to be holding and just navigating. Damn,
dude, that was good.
So see, all I'm doing is I reflect back a couple things, right?
Yeah.
And I validate. That makes so much sense that you're feeling so maxed out and overwhelmed or whatever. Shit. And I'm not gonna come in and say, is there anything I can do? Or, I'm not gonna do that yet. I just want to keep having you feel like I've got you and I'm supporting you. Like, whoa, I'm just listening, right?
Yeah. Okay. So let's go on with this a little bit more.
Yeah, keep going.
Because you lay that out there, and then automatically she's going to have more room to talk, because she will.
Exactly.
And she'll be like, yeah, I am just so done with this COVID thing and quarantines, and like,
oh, man,
I just don't know how to get ahead anymore.
Whoa. Honey, I'm just hearing how much you're holding, and I know this about you, and you're so strong in that you'll carry all this, and then you hit these moments like this where it's just like, feels like too much. And anyway, it makes sense again, because of what you're navigating. It's a lot.
Yeah. I just don't know what to do about it.
Yeah. This is there's a doorway here I could take, right?
Exactly.
I could come in and problem solve. So I could just ask, especially if we have some rapport and we know each other here a little bit, which I imagine you do. It's your spouse, right? I could say, and you don't know what to do. That was your last thing, right? I could say, okay, makes sense. You don't know what to do. And do you want me to keep listening? Would that feel best to you right now? Or do you want to transition to problem solving? Because I love that. I don't want to do that though, if it's not the right time.
That's awesome.
So it's transparent, right? I'm just transparent.
Yeah. The other thing you kept doing in there too is you kept sort of sprinkling in these, you were validating, validating, right? Even like a couple of times you even said, of course you feel that way.
Yeah.
Like immediately, even though we were role playing, I like the anxiety I felt, even though it was sort of staged, right? But the anxiety, like I kept thinking like if this was a real world conversation,
Yeah. Yeah.
the anxiety that I felt was it was okay to feel that way,
Yeah.
right? Which is I think what our women truly want, right?
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
want space for those feelings and validation for those feelings, right?
Completely, because she will at some point might want your help problem solving, or she might want to problem solve on her own, because it's a lot that she's navigating, and there might be something to fix there for sure. Who knows? But very first is like let her get it all out. Get it all out. Is there anything else? I could ask that. Is there anything else that you're navigating? That is a lot.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. Let me ask you this too. So for a man, right? Like, because if I'm a dude and I come to you for advice, it's because I want advice. I don't want you to just listen to me. I'd be like,
Yeah.
okay, man, so what do I do? So
Yep.
even though I know better, I've been married for a long time. I used to do this Mr. Fix It thing all the time. I don't do it anymore. I do something very similar to what you just shared. But at the same time, there's that part of me that I'm just like, oh, but I have some really good ideas. I could
Yeah.
totally. In fact, there's a part of. I think
Totally.
there's like a part of like a lot of guys that just like, well, my God, like, aren't I doing her like the worst disservice by not sharing
Right.
some advice with her? But
Yeah.
I think what you're going to tell me is no. You just let that go, right?
Let it go. Yeah. It's your cool advice might be amazing, but here's the thing. When we give our wives or whoever space to have their experience and feel it all the way through and just get it all out on the table, they feel really safe. That this your marriage can be one of the places where they bring their anxiety and fears and they open their heart to you, and they feel like safe, like cool. This guy has got me in this process, which is awesome, you know. And that means they're going to keep bringing that. And I think a lot of women do go outside the marriage to get emotional support because so many guys are compromised here. And I think that's okay, but it's also risky, because if your wife doesn't feel emotionally safe with you and she feels way more seen and emotionally safe with her friends or a therapist, is that really, I don't know, is that the dynamic you want? I personally don't want that. I want to be one of her go-to people personally, but not a lot of guys want to be, and I think that's okay. But maybe that can be explicit in your marriage. It's like, look, you know that I suck at feelings. I'd rather have you go to your girlfriends or a therapist or a coach. That's totally fine. Um, but I do think us guys are being asked in this day and age to increase our capacity here, and I think it's a cool thing to learn. I think, you know, just the fact that you have all these guys following you and listening to you, I imagine a lot of these guys are already trying, which is huge,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Because it does feel kind of like not in our wheelhouse sometimes. It's just not what we're best at.
Mhm.
But I just don't want guys to tell themselves they can't be nurturing and emotional. You can be. It's a developed capacity and a skill, and it's in there. I really believe that.
I agree with you. I wanted to, before we segue to the end here, I wanted to ask, go back to parenting with this exact
Okay.
conversation.
Okay.
So, do you know who Gary John Bishop is?
No.
He wrote the book on F yourself and stop
Okay.
doing that shit. And so
Okay.
he we talked about he talks a lot about in his books about self-sabotage and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we got on this topic a little bit on being empathetic and validating and that kind of thing. And we sort of touched upon uh, being the Mr. Fix It, right? And he's like, well, not only does your wife not want that, but your kids don't want that crap either.
Hmm.
So I'm curious to hear your thoughts. And he even gave the example. He's like, yeah, when my, you know, he's like, they don't want to hear like, he's very blunt, very bold. And he's like, they don't want to hear like the old school dad and what you used to do in the day and all that BS. Like, just
Yeah.
listen to them for the love of God, and just validate
Yeah.
where they're at. But do you want to do the same thing with kids, or do you want to be more of a mentor and a coach and a Mr. Fix It there?
This is an important question. Yeah, it brings up one thing I forgot to say in the last piece, which is when we listen to people and we don't step in and intervene with our cool, you know, advice or intervention. We let kids and our partner fall on their face and learn their own lessons and pick themselves back up. There's something really powerful, and the message we convey is, "I trust you. I trust your life. I trust you can handle your life. I trust you're the very person to meet this challenge right now. You got this. I believe in you." Like, that's what we convey when we don't come in with all of our cool interventions and advice. And I think that's very powerful, especially for kids. And yeah, there is a time and a place when dad needs to swoop in and save the day or offer the cool tip or whatever. But I like it. I mean, it's such a dance, but I prefer because kids also, they're vulnerable to wanting our approval and our love and the attention. And so they might, even though it goes against what they want to do, they might do what we think they should do because they want our love. And they
Oh
think that
yeah.
I'm not going to get dad's love if I don't take his advice here. Some kids are very vulnerable there. And I think that's important to wield that power judiciously as a dad. And I err more on the side of I trust you and you can handle this, and I'm going to continue to help give you the skills to meet the challenge you're going through.
Dang, man. I never even thought of that. Like the fact that the kids are like, well, maybe I'm not so on board with that advice, but I don't want to disappoint my dad. And I do need his love and approval and validation. So maybe I'll just go do that because he told me I should.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily make them a free thinker or it doesn't allow them to dust themselves off and make decisions. And,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
part of being a parent is, a big part of being a parent is providing a safe place for your kids to make mistakes
Exactly. You
and
nailed it.
learn, right?
Yeah.
They
To
got to
fall
learn.
down, fail,
Yeah.
hurt themselves. Like, exactly. They might get themselves into a world of hurt. And it's like, yeah, how are you going to get out of this? Damn, that looks painful.
Yep.
I'm here if you need me, kind of vibe.
And again, it's like the hardest thing to do as a man and a father to be like, oh, but I know exactly what he or
Yeah.
she should do. Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's
Yeah.
sort of like swooping in and robbing them of lessons. We got to think of it that way. Like, I'm robbing them of an amazing lesson here if I swoop in. And I think life is a more powerful teacher than me sometimes,
Yeah.
right? And how I live my life.
My dad, man, if you could be a fly on a wall, my dad does this really well. I the story that I shared with you, it makes him sound like, he was like he's a bum, right? He's not at all. He's still married to the same woman. I have two younger half brothers. He's a good father, just made, a couple of poor choices early on when he was younger.
Yeah.
But one thing that he does, like when I go to him for advice, is he'll just simply ask me more questions and not give me advice. And sometimes I have to stop him and be like, I know what you're doing. I've gone through all these scenarios. What I really want from you is advice. Like, what would you do if you were me?
Yeah.
I say, and he's just like, okay. He's like, all right. Well, he's like, if you're comfortable with it, I'll tell you what I would do. But he always errs on the side of like, let me ask you questions so you can figure it out versus let me tell you exactly how you should go about doing this.
I love that. I'm a fan of that approach.
Yeah. Man, this has been so cool. I'm so glad you rushed from your family camping trip to do this interview because
for sure. It's I'm so enjoying this. I could go for hours just hanging out with you here. It feels really good.
Me too.
Yeah.
This was great. I want to make sure that all of the audience can find your book, your new book out, and as well as just everything that you're doing in the world because it's really good work, man.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah. I would ask the listener just like this simple question is, do you know how to get to zero in your high stakes relationships, like your marriage, with your kids, with your parents, with your business associates? Do you know how to get back to a good place? If you know how, hell, nice work. Because most of us don't. And if you don't know how, and you're like, I could use some tips and some pointers here, then I think my book is going to be an awesome resource. And it's called Getting to Zero. Again, how to work through conflict in your high stakes relationships. You can find it. When's this coming out?
This will come out. I'll have to edit this part. I'm not exactly sure yet because we're so far ahead.
Oh, okay.
But I think it'll actually probably be in November.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so the book's out in October, and you can find it at all the places, your local indie store. You can special request it there, of course, and hopefully they'll ship it. Bookshop.org, Amazon, and if you want some special like tools and a little conflict quiz to see how you show up in conflict and get some pointers there, you can go to gettingtozerobook.com.
Outstanding. Well, we'll have all of those in the show notes. Jayson, this has been an amazing interview. I feel like we should do like a 5-part series because I feel like I think we just scratched the surface. See what I did there? I was just like, I feel like, and it was actually a thought.
I do that too, though. That's an appropriate way, I think, to do the feeling thing personally.
Yeah.
It just gets complicated in a marriage when you're in a fight. That's a little different.
Exactly. Very cool stuff, man. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Larry. An honor.
You bet.